Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast, where we tell the energy transition story of the global south. My name is Olubumi Olajide. My apologies if I sound different. I am currently off-grid deploying a solar project in a restaurant that will run entirely on clean cooking appliances. But that is a story for another day. On this, the 5th episode in our series on distributed energy for people and the planet, produced in collaboration with Global SDG 7 Hubs and the Energy Action Project. This episode is actually part 2 of the conversation we had a few weeks ago on how distributed renewables is transforming rural health and healthcare. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly encourage you to. And while you're doing that, if you find value in this series, please recommend it to a friend or a colleague and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Now I hand over to our host for this episode, Marilyn Smith, to introduce us to our guests and the discussion. Enjoy.
In the last episode of this series, the first of 2 focusing on the energy and health nexus, a shocking figure came up. The World Health Organization estimates that 1.5 billion people globally rely on local health clinics that have little or no access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy. It ended on a hopeful note, however, citing a commitment by the Government of India, Selco Foundation, and IKEA Foundation to electrify and equip 25,000 rural and remote clinics in India by the end of 2026. And presenting this initiative as a pilot that could radically transform access to improved health services across the global south. Perhaps unsurprisingly, digging deeper into this topic confirms that deploying promising technology on massive scales and across diverse contexts is rarely simple and straightforward. In bringing together an activist and a policy actor, we now aim to investigate more about the opportunities and the challenges ahead for India. An environmental health researcher with over 2 decades of campaigning and advocacy experience in environmental justice issues, Shweta Narayan is the international climate and health campaigner for the India-based NGO Healthcare Without Harm. Within the India Administrative Service, Mr. Ram Kumar fulfills multiple roles in the state of Meghalaya in northeast India. Currently, he is Additional Secretary to the Department of Health and Family Welfare and Mission Director of the National Health Mission. As such, he has assumed the role of Project Director of the Meghalaya Health Systems Strengthening Project. It was within this state that the government, Selco Foundation, and other stakeholders piloted the effort to combine distributed renewables and highly efficient technologies to upgrade rural and remote health clinics. While the future looks brighter and healthier for people these clinics serve, ignoring the past would be disrespectful of their lived experience until now. So, in discussing how access to energy for individuals and for public services can dramatically improve health and health care, we are also going to wade into the very challenging areas of energy, health, and social justice. Shweta, your work has been very focused on the kinds of communities where lack of energy seriously undermines both personal health and delivery of healthcare services. What else do listeners need to understand about their situation?
I think before we go into deeper about what lack of energy means, I think it's important to understand who are these people, or where are these communities. And they're normally known as pollution impacted communities or fence line communities, and they're located on the margins of toxic chemical industrial facilities or extractive industries like mines. And we have seen that across the globe, the pollution impacted communities are often victims of what is called environmental racism. People who are more marginalized communities, people of color, people in the global south, in India, people from particular castes, people in certain classes are exposed or are located on the margins of toxic facilities. This is more of a social and socioeconomic challenge. These are communities that are often have high poverty rates, limited access to education, inadequate housing, very limited political power to influence decisions. Now, in this context, when they face lack of energy access, it further compounds or exacerbates their vulnerabilities and risks. These communities are already, their bodies are burdened with exposure to toxic chemicals. And because of lack of energy access, they often use biomass or fossil fuels, which are cheap and abundantly available in these regions as their primary source of energy. And that means for cooking, that for daily usage, and that means double the exposure in terms of exposure to indoor pollutants, and especially to women and children.
In the last episode of this series, Rashita Misra of Selco Foundation raised the point that these very poor people will consider things like distance, transport costs, and income lost when deciding whether to seek medical care. Is this your experience on the ground?
And often you will see communities who are exposed to more chemicals, living in impoverished conditions, delay their medical care because they don't have access to it. So they go to hospitals when it's absolutely impossible for them to function. And mostly it's at the last stage where it's more difficult and more expensive to access care. So it's both. It means that it's delayed and it's more dangerous health impacts, which means loss of productive days, which has a socio-economic burden also. So it means a more expenditure on medical bills, loss of productive days, and pushing them further in the margins of poverty. Lack of health infrastructure, lack of energy access in the healthcare further denies them the medical care that they require, and they require more of medical care because of their exposure to toxic chemicals and their vulnerabilities. So that sort of delays their response to care. So I think lack of energy access sort of plays in a much more social, multifaceted, dimensional role in communities that are already marginalized because of environmental pollution.
Mr. Ram Kumar, together with Selco Foundation and others, you spearheaded this initiative in the state of Meghalaya to bring both distributed renewables and highly efficient technologies to health clinics that lacked reliable energy. I think it is helpful for listeners to understand some of the challenges involved. As you described offline, the state is spread across a fairly large geographical area, but rather sparsely populated, with just 3.5 million people living in some 7,000 communities. A community, as you mentioned, would be considered the touch point where people can access government services, including healthcare. It also warrants pointing out that the state is mountainous and has many rivers, which support hydropower generation. Recently, the state announced it had reached 100% electrification to households. But in recent years, electricity demand growth has outstripped supply, and grid systems are aging, which results in high losses. This is particularly true for low-tension power lines that traverse mountain areas to remote villages. Additionally, low rainfall in recent years has reduced water levels feeding into hydro stations, and actual generation has fallen substantially below capacity. Thus, in reality, many villages have power only 4 to 6 hours per day, which would also be true for some health clinics. In this kind of context, what is most needed to bring transformation to the energy and health nexus?
Now, when it comes to reaching to all of them in terms of healthcare service delivery, so the states like Meghalaya are largely dependent on technology. Now, the technology, that's why it's so important for us, for those who are creating technology, developing technology, to think about these marginal areas, which are so important. If you don't think about technologies which can serve them, then there is no point in technology because they'll get underserved. So for example, Meghalaya did not have much penetration about the landline connections, the wired telephone connections, but that one generation got skipped with a cell phone connection. Then after that, they broke the Wi-Fi barrier and by going directly to a 4G. There was no Wi-Fi, but it was going to a 4G directly. The technology has been a great equalizer for them. Similarly, in terms of energy, it is the solar which we are using in many health centers. So through that technology as an important factor, and through solar technologies, decentralized technologies, that's what we're trying to improve. That we are trying to saturate all of them. Because of very long, distant, centers from each other, the power, the distribution companies and etc. will have an issue in terms of losses in terms of services, etc. Solar are a little notorious for good, great stories, but after that, the postscript of those stories are not great because many of them are left unattended to. So we are changing that, and we would like to have a system checking and involve community in terms of training and maintenance of these things and simplify it. We have chosen these kind of technologies where we can deploy standalone solar power plants in these centers, and we can get through remote monitoring systems the data of how they're functioning and have a system of maintenance. Even as we speak, there is a significant amount of power cut this year, particularly because of lack of rainfall. So we need to have technologies to able to have us to adapt to these changing circumstances, and that technology helps us for healthcare services delivery also.
What lessons have you learned so far? And what opportunities and challenges do you see ahead with the initiative to scale up electrification of health clinics?
The one other challenge we probably have is that the people who are creating technologies do not many times look at this global south or the bottom of the pyramid problems which are there. They are always looking at, okay, how much I can. The whole idea of enterprise is designed around extracting from the people who have the most, not from empowering the people who don't have enough. If you remember Mr. C.K. Prahlad's theory of bottom of the pyramid, it was quite famous for some time. At least I used to hear in late 90s and early 2000s. That suddenly went out of fashion. I mean, not blaming any particular organizations, but those, when the big IT tech companies, everyone started coming, it was all focused on the top one tier or two tier of people who would be able to afford all these things. Technology for the poor, if you think about the level, it is not progressing at that speed. It is coming slowly, because people are not inventing and investing on that. You have to invest in that. Only then technology as a role of an equalizer, as a part of the civilization itself, will make sense. Otherwise, it will not be an equalizer. It will be more of a divider. Someone who has access to this will be able to do this. Someone who does not have access will not be able to do anything. Then it creates a lot of tension, friction between those who have and who not. And in fact, that is what creates an impact on the environment. People feel that, I've been deprived. The only way is that I'll, exploit the environment around me to maximum possible level so that I can reach the tier 1, tier 2. But then it is like pulling down everyone. So it's not going to work.
Shweta, we all know that even clean energy technologies require the extraction of certain minerals, which is often carried out by these extremely poor people. Would you like to respond to this point?
In that terms, what Mr. Ram Kumar mentioned in terms of technology, it just fits perfectly. Another friend of mine who used to very famously say, because he used to lecture at IIT Madras for a very long time, and he would say, technological revolution is not making a microchip run nanosecond faster. It's making sure, because outside in the outskirts of Madras, there's a huge stone carvers industry, and their workers are still dying of silicosis, and we have not come up with a protective gear that can protect them from the dust. So technological revolution should be for people who are day in and day out exposed to toxins, and if they can protect them. So I think this, this would be the way we see technology for larger good.
I appreciate, Mr. Ram Kumar, that you reminded us of the days when everyone was talking about how technology could transform the lives at the bottom of the pyramid, including that even though these are very poor people, they represent a huge potential market for energy consumption, health services, and goods and services more broadly. Based on past experiences, where do you now see missed opportunity?
See, for example, low bandwidth IoT devices are there. The low bandwidth Internet of Things devices are there, but it is still not up to the mark. IoT devices working on low bandwidth helps in remote monitoring a lot. And it helps in decentralizing data available to the person whose affordability is limited. For them, the information is available on a very fast track mechanism. Now you are able to tell very particular weather about particular areas in United States and Europe and etc. But that level is not available everywhere. Why is it not available is the question. Those satellites are all focused on areas where there is high income generation areas. We don't have enough small devices. Small farm owner wants to just figure out, what is happening in that level of IoT devices at affordable is still not there. Same thing with healthcare also. We would like to know some instruments are working, some instruments are not working, some healthcare service deliveries are possible or not possible. That somewhere in terms of energy, there are so many micro turbines is still not a very successful thing in terms of idle power. Even solar, I think the whole world is grappling, but there is a lot of interest in battery because EVs are there, top tier people are purchasing EVs. So there is an idea to how do you redefine the whole saving of energy in battery forms, overall rethinking the battery and rethinking the energy of within the same surface area of solar panels, how do you extract more energy from the sun? So that technologies are, very important in terms of having this thing, but we would like that to play a role because so that decentralized internet, decentralized energy, and decentralized access to technology. These three things are so important to have more open source material so that people can keep innovating.
Do you see any promising technology rollout, whether for health or other aspects of improving daily life for marginalized communities, already happening, Shweta?
One thing that is already happening in one of the central Indian states where air pollution is a big, big problem is using low-cost devices to monitor air quality, to put out air quality alerts to people, and especially to people, pregnant women and newborn children and elderly in the community, to ensure that they are protected. So technology has a huge role to play in terms of detecting the problem and disseminating. So, I mean, there are two ways to sort of disseminate that information. One is to the polluter to sort of, or the pollution regulation agency to sort of act on the violation, because poor air quality technically should not be there, or industry should not be emitting beyond the norms that have been prescribed under the law. And the second would be to sort of in mitigation in terms of in the response to protect people who are most vulnerable. And that's where you see the role of technology in sort of delivering better and prompt healthcare and services to people who probably would never know that, today the air quality is really bad, and if I have asthma, I shouldn't be going out. So there is a role that technology can play. I think the implementation of the technology or the innovation in which that technology is deployed needs to be something that should be prioritized based on local requirements. And each geography will have its own vulnerabilities, and technology can be deployed to sort of address those vulnerabilities in improving health conditions.
Shweta, you mentioned earlier that marginalized communities around the world face many of the same double or perhaps multiple disadvantages. Within the context of the European Green Deal, much effort is underway to determine how to deliver a just clean energy transition. Maybe you'd like to say a few words about justice in the Indian or the Global South context.
And what I have seen in my experience in any pollution impacted community, be it here or in other parts of Global South or even in the US, I think there is a common saying that, all the stories are same. All the stories of exploitation and marginalization are the same. It's different names in different places. Environmental and health justice, both these concepts fall within the larger umbrella of different forms of justice that we see. And these are either distributive justice, where there is a fair distribution of goods and resources and opportunities in society, or retributive justice, where there is, imposition of penalties for wrongdoing. Restorative justice, where there is damage done to environment and people's health, which needs to be repaired, or procedural justice, where there are ways in which, you need to approach certain wrongdoings. I think all of this sort of environment and health justice falls within these wider spectrum of theories of justice, including social justice. So there's a common thread. And the fight in all these communities, or the demands, are beyond just repairing of environmental health. The demands are for a life of dignity. And within that, we are looking at restoring, repairing people's damaged environment, damaged air, water, or land, or damaged lungs or reproductive system.
Clearly, governments have a responsibility to address these injustices. But do you have a sense that they know how to? Do they know enough about how people are experiencing them, and perhaps have been for decades or even centuries?
In terms of policymakers sort of addressing these issues, I think there have been many, many interventions, both at local, regional, subnational and national levels, where policymakers are beginning to understand the complexities of these sort of social injustices and addressing them in different forms, where health decision makers are sort of addressing the lack of access to energy or lack of health in better planning. There are environmental regulations that have been brought in to clean up the air, clean up the water. So there are different ways that these challenges get interacted and facilitated at a policy level, I would say. I think it's a lot of it is articulated by the communities. They are creating their own stories and narratives and translating their lived experience for people like us or policymakers to sort of understand and relate to it. So a lot of the justice narrative comes from the communities. And it's for us to sort of, again, articulate or reframe this narrative in a way that policymakers can learn from it and sort of make policies that address the challenges that communities are faced. So it's been sort of an interesting interaction because, as I said, that wherever there's a fight for clean air or clean water, it's a larger fight for a life with dignity, a life that respects the right to healthy environment and health.
Have you been able to stimulate this kind of approach in India, Mr. Ram Kumar, where policy action derives from deeper knowledge of local lived experience?
One of the things which governments should do is be open to collaborations. The idea of openness is so important because it's not that the knowledge is sacrosanct at one location and everything. It can come from multiple sources. Solutions can come from multiple sources. Solutions can be small. Partners who have small solutions, they don't know how to scale it up. So government should invest in scaling it up. You think about creating a model how it can be scaled up.
How can that then be aligned with national or even international policy?
We try to get into the international priorities, national priorities also. International priorities has a very clear SDG indicators are there, which is, indicators to be achieved is also there. We are saying, okay, are we doing something which is in alignment with that? Are we doing things which is in alignment with national priorities and state priorities? Because climate and the whole idea of environment is for all. It's not that someone doing something in Poland might affect you. Someone what you're doing, someone might affect someone in Middle East. It is quite possible where it affects you. We are living in an ecosystem. It is very difficult to say which is the right model to approach at what particular time. And whenever there is question, generally governments have already started thinking in these lines. Thinking, okay, are we sticking to our SDG goals? Are we sticking to these national priorities because we have a certain mandate to have certain level of renewable energy, certain level of environmental responsibilities are there? Are we sticking to that or not? It's always a guidance thing which we have, guiding principles, I would say, which are there already for us. For what we are doing in Meghalaya in terms of with Selco, in terms of saturating all the health facilities, they had part of the solution, but we said we'll go for a saturation approach. So then how do you scale it up? We need to support. Only through that openness and collaboration. These two things are so important in terms of healthcare as well as environment. In fact, for solving many of our developmental issues, these two things I think is what I think the government should see.
Shweta, I'd like to give you the chance to speak more about how you and the organization you work with are challenging not only the problem of access to healthcare, but the climate impacts linked to delivering healthcare.
I am a climate and health campaigner with Healthcare Without Harm, which is an international non-governmental organization, and it works to transform the healthcare sector worldwide so that the health sector can reduce its environmental and climate footprint and become a community anchor for sustainability and a global leader in the movement for environmental health and justice. The health sector works on the philosophy of first do no harm. However, if you look at the practice of the health sector, it's the fifth largest contributor to the global, greenhouse gas emissions. The contribution totally is about 5.2%, which if health sector were a country, it would be the fifth largest emitter. There is a substantial use of toxic chemicals within the health sector that damages people's health. So the idea is that if a sector that is like the health sector is involved in healing of people, it cannot be hurting them. Hence, the sector needs to clean up its own house, adopt practices that are not harming people's health, and truly heal the people and the planet. So that's the philosophy within which Healthcare Without Harm also works, with the intention to work in the sector to reduce its environmental and climate footprint. We have a flagship program called the Global Green and Healthy Hospitals, where health systems and hospitals from around the world. This program is present in 84 countries, and there are more than 60,000 hospitals and health systems that are part of this program. And they work primarily on sustainability, on reducing environmental and climate footprint of individual facilities and systems. We also work with UN agencies like the World Health Organization, UNDP, and national and subnational systems on climate, environment, and health policies. We are working with UN agencies on procurement, sustainable procurement, and also primarily working also on the health sector leadership in climate action, which is absolutely necessary at this point. And I think the only sector that can lead by example and motivate other sectors to act on climate immediately would be the health sector. So if people who are listening want to get involved, if they're part of hospitals, health systems, if they're health professionals, there are always ways to get involved and expand the mission of healthcare in their communities, in their localities that they serve, in their regions. And they can get in touch with Healthcare Without Harm to collaborate, share their experiences of best practices so that we can also learn and in the process access the valuable knowledge and resource that the network has to improve their own sustainability goals.
In closing, I'd like to give each of you the chance to say a few words about the opportunities and challenges you see for the energy and health nexus that are beyond or perhaps parallel to or underpinning the technology aspects. Mr. Ramkumar, would you like to speak first?
I think we need to speak a lot on energy and health because both are important in terms of bringing everyone together. Otherwise, a lot of section of society keep on getting left out if you don't have access to energy or access to health. And they don't have any other choice. The very definition of poverty to me is lack of choice. Nothing else, not resources and etc. It's not having choice. So that's something we need to constantly take and put on. These kind of conversations helps us to keeping us in track and of delivering that. In terms of challenges, I think the biggest challenge is again the same openness and acceptance to this actual changing scenario. That only actually takes a lot of time. From the communities, it takes a lot of time. From governmental policymakers, it takes a lot of time. So that's the challenge I think we have. Openness, collaboration, and technology.
Shweta, any last thoughts?
In terms of the biggest crisis that I see right now with the climate conversation is the energy transition. If the energy transition is done wrong, is done in the same ways and principles that the fossil fuel industries operated, which is centralized, large, privately owned, then nothing is going to get fixed. Because the people who have been marginalized historically, the transition will come on the backs of those people. And that's not just. So I think that's the biggest crisis. The biggest opportunity that we have, and I mentioned this recently in another platform where I was sharing with Mr. Ram Kumar, is the opportunity that this is the moment to be bold, courageous, be innovative, and transform the system that has somewhat historically been unjust or not favored the people who are the most marginalized. This is an opportunity of leadership. This is an opportunity in thinking and courage that policymakers need to show people that things can be done differently for all of us to equally be the inhabitants of this planet.
How can policymakers include marginalized communities in this opportunity?
I've seen and I've heard communities also outline that they are the authorities of the experience that they are undergoing in terms of pollution and health damages never sort of get admitted by policymakers, and they're always seen with doubt that they have a vested interest, even though it's their lived experience. So the challenge of openness and collaboration is definitely very, very. I think there is also a challenge of transparency and accountability, because that also would mean sharing of power in being more accountable to people in terms of the policies. I think I want to pick up something that very important Mr. Ram Kumar said about the decentralized nature of solutions. And I think that is very important, because to me, when you say what is the biggest crisis, working in the area of climate and health, I would say climate change is the biggest crisis that we're facing, because that is going to further exacerbate all inequalities, all injustices in proportions that we have never imagined. We saw a bit of a trailer during COVID. And who got what kind of response, or in big cities, who got access to hospitals and beds, and who got access to oxygen. And majority of the global south got the access to vaccines much late. In a lot of places, people are not fully vaccinated. And we see this discrimination take a shape in global form in crises that sort of brings all of us together. But the response is very, very different to people who are in the top 2 tier and the people who are in the bottom. So I think with COVID or climate crisis, the discrimination is going to get further exacerbated, and the solutions are going to be local, decentralized nature that empowers people, that undoes a lot of historical discrimination. Those are the solutions that will actually work.
In hosting this podcast series, I've been struck again and again by an idea that is counterintuitive to energy experts in the Western world. In many ways, delivering a just, clean energy transition in the Global South means being bold and innovative in small ways that deliver big impacts. Adding a solar-powered engine to an old treadle sewing machine, for example, triples a tailor's productivity. Equipping smallhold farmers with a range of efficient technologies creates a local economy that is better for everyone. And in rural health clinics, having electricity at night enables treatment that saves the lives of women and infants. As all the interviewees attest, taking time to understand what communities want and need is critical to ensuring true empowerment. That wraps up our initial dive into the energy and health nexus. I'd like to thank Rashida Misra, Selco Foundation, Heather Adair Rohani of WHO, Shweta Narayan of Healthcare Without Harm, and Mr. Ram Kumar of the Indian Administrative Service for sharing their knowledge and experience. As Shweta mentioned, climate change now represents the overarching challenge in relation to energy for development and for improved lives and livelihoods. It is fitting, then, that we next devote 2 episodes of Distributed Renewables for People and the Planet to energy for cooling. As temperatures rise, energy demand to keep food from spoiling and ensure work and home environments are healthy will increase exponentially. We'll be back soon with more great conversations on technology innovations and ways to build up supportive ecosystems to ensure distributed renewables take their rightful place in a clean energy future. To learn more about the wide range of activity underway to improve access to energy, visit the website of the Global SDG 7 Hubs. That's www.globalsdg7hubs.org. Search The Energy Talk on your favorite podcast platform to hear past episodes of this series. The opener examines the big picture of building up ecosystems to roll out local technologies at scales that deliver global change. Episodes 2 and 3 investigate how energy for agriculture can transform the lives of millions of smallhold farmers. Episodes 4 and 5 focus on energy for health. For the Energy Action Project, ENACT, I'm Marilyn Smith.